About your book, Circles of Freedom, Friendship, Love, and Loyalty in the Indian National Struggle, and you take us through the lives of five individuals who, in their own way, had an impact on the national struggle, and it was a kind of self discovery for them as well.
One is what you mentioned is the national movement itself, because each of
Yes,
them are drawn to it and have this vision of uh, being part of the freedom struggle. And the second is these ties of love, friendship, and loyalty. So I wanted
right,
to bring all these factors together, and fortunately, I was able to find the material which would allow me to do so. It's a history book.
right.
It's
Yes,
not fiction. It's history. So I was also
yes, of
bound
course.
by what the evidence revealed.
Hello and welcome once again to Kitabi Baatein. I'm Abhishek, also known as Books Wale Bhaiya. Today I have the honor of interviewing Ambassador T.C.A Raghavan, with whom we'll be discussing his latest book, Circles of Freedom. Ambassador Raghavan holds a PhD in history from Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. He has been High Commissioner of India to Singapore and Pakistan. He was also Director General of the Indian Council of World Affairs in New Delhi from 2018 to 2021. His first book, Attendant Lords, was awarded the Muhammad Habib Memorial Prize for the best book on medieval Indian history by the Indian History Congress 2017, and The Circles of Freedom is his fourth book. Ambassador Raghavan, it's absolutely an honor to have you here on Kitabi Baatein.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Great. So I think a career as a diplomat, but I think your second love definitely is history. Not only hold a PhD in history from JNU, you've also written four extremely readable, extremely well-written books. Uh, in the context of your passion for history and your qualifications, experience in writing history, I wanted to ask a question about history before we start talking about your book. So I was reading a few quotes on history, and I got to know that a famous author, George Santana, said that history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, told by people who were never there. And we had none other than Napoleon Bonaparte writing that history is a myth that men choose to believe. And among contemporary historians, we have Vikram Sampath, who said in his book Vevarts of Bharat, he wrote about the narratives in history, and he said that unless lions have their historians, the tales will always glorify the hunter. In this backdrop, as a contemporary historian, what history means to you?
Well, to me, history is a way of reflecting on past events, uh, not as a guide to the present or as a guide to what we should do in the future, but as an aid to help us understand ourselves and our context better. So
Right,
the past is not it's not like a formula which you can extract. History is not like a formula which you can extract from hidden or um, documents which are not been accessible, and which, when you study, reveal a secret formula which you can then use to guide your way through the present into the kind of future you want. No, but it certainly
right,
helps you understand yourself and contextualize yourself. So I would see it in those terms. And there is a small germ of truth in each of those quotations which you mentioned, because history is very much a subjective process. It's not
yes,
an objective science. Uh,
that's
it's,
true.
it's it's very personal, and it's a dialogic process between the historian or the person studying the past and the facts themselves. So every history will
Definitely.
vary from one historian to the other, and there will never be one definite interpretation which will hold good for all times and for everyone.
Absolutely. About your book, Circles of Freedom, Friendship, Love, and Loyalty in the Indian National Struggle, and you take us through the lives of five individuals who, in their own way, had an impact on the national struggle, and it was a kind of self discovery for them as well. When I read your book, I sensed that although I have read a fair bit on the Indian freedom struggle and Indian independence, and I noticed that a lot of the books which I have read so far talk about the partition in particular, talk about the orgy of violence, the destruction, the killings, the differences, the game plans, the sinister game plans of the British and the Muslim League. Yet you chose to write within that purview of freedom struggle on the people, on their friendships. So, what made you take this different path?
Well, the events comprising the national movement or the freedom struggle are on the whole well known, and the principal personalities have been studied in great detail. I wanted
Yes,
to look at I wanted to look at those events and those personalities from a slightly different angle, a slightly tangential perspective. So I thought of constructing this story around uh, four or five people who, while not unknown, are not
yes,
not in the main radar, not in the main
yes,
frame of the
yes.
Indian nationalist leaders of that time. So I chose slightly unknown characters, and fortunately, I was able to find this group which is connected from the time that they are young men and young women to the time of independence, by which they have become, older, more experienced, and within whom this loose kind of fraternity and friendship remained. So this is what interested me about this set of characters.
Right. And as you mentioned that these people had their own role to the freedom struggle, and yet they do not really fit the frame, because if you ask any Indian next to who made India free, they will say Gandhi and Nehru. That's the narrative since the time India became free. In fact, I find it surprising that even Sardar Patel's role is mostly understood in the context of uniting India after independence, which he undoubtedly did, but he also played a very prominent role. So it's not even largely Gandhi, Patel, Nehru. People say it's Gandhi and Nehru. Would you say that the history, especially of the freedom struggle in that sense, has been hijacked by the historians since
I
independence?
don't think it has been hijacked. I mean, it is a fact that the two most charismatic personalities within the nationalist pantheon were Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru.
Yes,
In terms of personal charisma and in terms of the long period of time with which they were associated with public events, that these were the two principal personalities. But certainly there were many others too, and Sardar Patel, Subhash Chandra Bose, and many others were all there. So I don't think it was that they were hijacked, but I think their principle, their charisma uh, made people focus on very sharply,
yes,
and in the process, the focus on the other characters got somewhat diffused.
refused.
I would say that there are many people. In fact, Sardar Patel and even Subhash Chandra Bose are very well known.
Yes,
Uh, there are many others about whom we know virtually next to nothing. And in their time, they were not unknowns. They
yes,
were they were pretty major figures, and they had personalities which certainly would uh, would would lend themselves to very fruitful study by future biographers.
that's very true. So coming to the personalities, we have people Asaf Ali, Sarojini Naidu, Syed Hussein, Syed Mahmud, and Arona Asaf Ali. People with somewhat different backgrounds, with two women between them, and Sarojini Naidu ji was, as you mentioned, a very gregarious women. And do you think this friendship was a little unlikely, or it was likely, or what exactly you think would have brought them together? Was it the love for motherland? Was it ideology? What exactly you think was led to this friendship?
Well, as I say on a number of occasions, it was a loose kind of fraternity. One shouldn't try to ge- create the impression that this was a tightly knit group which
Yes,
coordinated within itself, and they acted in a spirit of togetherness. No, it was not. uh, Sarojini Naidu met Asaf Ali And the fifth character in my book, Sayyid Hussein, when they were young men, students in London. And she was
Yes.
herself by then an established poetess.
Yes.
Quite unusually for an Indian woman, she had been published in Europe, and that made her that gave her a certain profile in India. And she had already, although she was still a young woman, she was already had a certain public profile in India. So she met them when they were young men. She was in her early 30s. They were in their early 20s, and they struck up a kind of friendship, as often happens when Indians find themselves in a foreign
In the foreign
country.
land. Yes.
And they were certainly totally bowled over by Sarojini Naidu's personality, because she was this very vivacious, very attractive uh, older woman who had a certain profile, even in England, and
Yes.
it was inevitable that they would be bowled over by her. And
Right.
she liked them because she had this particular, even from her younger days, she had this particular view about Hindu-Muslim relations, the
Yes.
necessity of them being founded on founded on strong personal friendships. And she wanted, therefore, she was gregarious by nature. Now, the
Yes.
fourth character, Sayyid Mahmud, was also in London at that time, but he didn't
Yes.
know Sarojini Naidu then. He came to know her in 1916, and that and then gradually came to know Sayyid Hussein and Asaf Ali. They knew each other slightly because Sayyid Hussein and Sayyid Mahmud had been together in Aligarh, and Asaf Ali and Sayyid Mahmud were together in London. But it's only in the early 20s that they get to know each other better, and they again are part of Sarojini Naidu's circle. So, in that
Right.
sense, Sarojini Naidu is a kind of binding glue. Uh,
Yes.
the fifth character, the next character, Aruna Asaf Ali, enters in 1928 when she's a young woman. She's just 18 or 19, and she marries Asaf Ali, who's
That's
20
okay.
years older to
Yes.
her. And this really forms the entire set of characters I wanted to write about. Now, as I said, it's a loose fraternity, but two the two things are important in terms of what comprises this circle. One is what you mentioned is the national movement itself, because each of
Yes.
them are drawn to it and have this vision of uh, being part of the freedom struggle. And the second is these ties of love, friendship, and loyalty. So I wanted to
Right.
bring all these factors together, and fortunately, I was able to find the material which would allow me to do so. It's a history book.
Right.
It's
Yes.
not a it's not fiction. It's history. So I was also
Yes.
bound
Of course.
by what the evidence revealed.
Right. So you talked about Sarojini Naidu coming to Asaf Ali as he's in any case of the prominent, person, the character in this book. So he is, as described by you and many others, as a nationalist Muslim who definitely placed national interest above religion and above many other things. He was not someone who liked the idea of Pakistan and wanted, to move to Pakistan or looked at it as the homeland wherein the Muslims will feel safe and all. Nothing of that sort. And yet you talked about the dilemmas which even the nationalist Muslims face. So one event was definitely the demand for Pakistan, and as you mentioned, by 1930s, even many in the intellectual class of Muslims, many of them started gravitating towards Pakistan. And then we have the before the Mopla rebellion, the revolt led by the Ali brothers for the Ottoman Caliphate. How do you see a nationalist Muslims' ideas, their mindset, especially Asif Ali, in the context of events like the Ottoman Caliphate and the rebellion and the demand for Pakistan?
Well, one of the great dilemmas, of the first half of the 20th century is that the Muslims of South Asia never associated themselves with the Indian National Congress as strongly as in the normal course one would have expected them to.
Right.
It's one of those dilemmas, and people kept looking for ways to bring about a stronger association between the Congress and the Muslims. In fact, you can see the history of the Congress as a continuous effort to try to bring the Muslims into their fold.
Yes.
Uh, so from its early days, the Congress always tried to, have a agenda or a manifesto which was non-sectarian and non-denominational, uh, because they thought we should be open to all castes and all creeds. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't working. And one example of how why it was not working uh, was provided by the partition of Bengal in 1905,
Yes.
when there was a great uprising, a great increase in nationalist sentiment all across the country. But by and large, the Muslims stayed out of it, and to some extent, it was a victory of the British policy of divide and
Right.
rule. But they were also, the fact was that they were not as supportive of the Congress uh, as was expected. So at that stage, I think many nationalist leaders understood this problem. But the first major attempt to address it was by Bal Gangadhar Tilak in 1916, when he reached the famous Lucknow Pact with the Muslim League. The Lucknow Pact was happened principally because of Tilak and because of Jinnah. Jinnah was at that time also what you term as a nationalist
Yes.
Muslim, but Tilak was very much coming from the Hindu nationalist. He was, in fact, in many ways, the first Hindutva politician. But he
Yes.
saw the need for a stronger Muslim association with the Congress, and that is why he reached this agreement, which provided a certain number of fixed seats to Muslims in all the provincial legislatures. And
Right.
Now, the next attempt of this kind, now many in the Congress didn't like the idea, but they had
Yeah.
to go along with it because of Tilak's own personality. But the next major attempt of this kind was by Mahatma Gandhi, and that was when there was a rise of very strong sentiment amongst Muslims in South Asia in favor of the caliphate in Turkey. And Mahatma Gandhi thought that the Congress should support this sentiment and support Muslims in their demand that the caliphate in Turkey should not be disturbed by British imperialism, because this will bring the Congress and the Muslims closer together.
Closer.
Now, that attempt also ended in failure, in communal riots, and principally because the demand itself was a bit. It had no relevance to India.
Yes.
In
Yes.
Turkey itself, people decided to abolish the caliphate quite regardless of the British. So
Right.
the Khilafat movement in India was left without any legs to stand on. But the point is, it was an effort to bring the Muslims closer to the Congress. Now,
Right.
these efforts, by and large, all ended in failure. The Lucknow
Yes.
Pact, the reserved seats, was given up by the Congress in the Motilal Nehru report towards the end of the decade, and this gulf between the Muslims and the Congress kept growing. And I think the dilemma of the nationalist Muslim was that he saw the virtues of being, he or she saw the virtues of being in the Congress. They saw the importance of the Congress program and the Congress agenda for all the people of South Asia, but somehow their community on the whole was staying out of it. I mean, this was
Yes.
the great dilemma for the nationalist Muslim.
Definitely. And as you mentioned in the book, so the Mopla, there were the Mopla riots, there was the Ottoman Caliphate issues, and then even the further points in the freedom struggle, the 42 Quit India movement and all. There, further, it is argued by you as well as many historians that these actually widened the gap, in fact, between the Congress leaders themselves, because there were many leaders who at times did not agree with everything what Mahatma Gandhi said. So, Quit India movement, a civil disobedience movement, some of the movements just called off. And so, not only did they show the gaps which existed between Congress leaders, as well as further it widened the gulf between Hindus and Muslims, and it kind of gave more weightage to what Jinnah said, and eventually we saw the partition happening. So would you agree to that?
Well, in the sense that yes, the Congress was always a divided house.
Yes,
It was
yes,
never, it was not run like a totalitarian party, and it could not be because India was too diverse, too complex. There were too many interests and too many different views which were jostling against each other. So, in that sense, there was never one view which everyone agreed with, but on the whole, they were like-minded.
yes,
There were serious differences of opinion on tactical issues, but on the broader strategic objectives, they were like-minded,
yes,
and they understood the British game. They understood how the British were trying to play divide and rule with regard to the Muslims, then increasingly with regard to the depressed classes. You know, but the fact is that for various reasons, and some of them I have gone into in the book, and others are, too wide to go into in one book itself. Uh, the Muslims, by and large, uh, were not drawn to the Congress in the numbers that they should have been,
it should agree. True,
and
very
that
true.
provided that created a great dilemma for those Muslims who were in the Congress, but also for the Congress itself, because clearly at certain points of time, the Muslim League drew a great deal of support from Muslims in India,
Yes,
and then the question was how to deal with it politically.
true. So coming back to one of the characters, I got to know a lot about Arona Asaf Ali from your book, and one very interesting character and a person, I should say. So there are a couple of things there. One is that when Asaf Ali married Arona Asaf Ali, later on there was a quote by Muslim League leaders that he married a Hindu, and it is not clear whether she has embraced Islam or not. And so that were the comments being made, and the fact that later on we did see the gulf between them widening. It is said by you in the book that she was coming out on her own, Arona Asaf Ali, and her views even on political matter differed from even Mahatma Gandhi. So she was more like a radical voice. So she coming out from the her husband's, you can say, life plans, because he was in jail and she was out. So how do you see the relation between Asaf Ali and her wife at a personal level as well as in the context of the freedom struggle?
See, at the time they got married, it was obviously a conversation stopper, just like it would be today.
Yes,
Today it would be called love jihad, uh, and uh, and there was a similar kind of outrage at that time too. That because notwithstanding so many so many people who saw the great merits of Hindus and Muslims working together in the national movement, no one actually suggested that there should be intermarriage between the two communities.
yes,
But Asaf Ali and Aruna Asaf Ali met, and notwithstanding the fact that there was a 20-year age difference between them, they fell in love and they decided to get married. Uh, so it was quite an extraordinary kind of relationship from the start. And then, although she never, I think she convert, not I think, she did convert formally for the process of a marriage, because
yes,
they were first married uh, by uh, by a by a Muslim clergy, by a ulema in a mosque, for which she had to formally convert, and she adopted a Muslim name, but it was just a technical requirement. Uh, and thereafter, they had a civil marriage, uh, and they lived together in Asaf Ali's old house in Old Delhi,
yes,
in very much a Muslim quarter. Uh,
yes,
but religion was not an issue in her marriage. And gradually, Asaf Ali's, the rest of his friends, his family, they all accepted it as such, and she became a very valuable member of that community, which just tells you uh, I mean, and this is something which is relevant now as it was then, that religion is important, organized religion is important, but its importance is there only up to a point. There are other things which are even more important and which really go into the making of people's lives. And that is really demonstrated by Asaf Ali and Arona Asaf Ali. And because he was in Congress, because he was taking part in different agitations, she followed that path, which was not unexpected. Many wives of prominent congressmen also became, they went to jail. They would take part in Congress programs. They became loyal Congress volunteers, and Aruna Asaf Ali also did the same. So she was following a well-trodden path till from 1928 till 1942, when at the launch of the Quit India movement, Asaf Ali and the rest of the Congress Working Committee are jailed, and she suddenly something snapped in her. She changed, and she thought that she's had enough of this, and
Yes.
certain anger and a certain outrage took grasped her, and she decided to go underground and resist the British with whatever she could do. And she stayed underground for the next 3.5, 4 years, and in the process, her personality changed. She became much more radical. She became much more forthright, and the marriage, then the paths diverged. It was not a
Yes.
divergence on personal issues that we know of. It was certainly not a divergence on religious issues.
Right.
The main reason for the divergence is political, but one can surmise and you can guess that possibly the age difference kicked in. Asif Ali was a moderate, a constitutionalist. He was a lawyer. He believed in gradual change. He believed in doing things incrementally. She was in a hurry. You can see the age difference playing a role, but certainly their paths diverged. And although they remained formally married, in fact,
Yes.
for all intents and purposes, the marriage had ended. They had diverged. They had gone on different paths. So
Right.
that is part of the story which I try to outline in the book.
Right. So the other two people I wanted to ask, Syed Hussein and Syed Mahmud, and how you think they fitted in this circle, and also very interestingly, the other two people I want to talk about, they are not a part of the circle you talked about, Hakim Ajmal Khan and Dr. Ansari, because reading book makes you understand that these two were also at the forefront and did play a role in shaping these people. So how do you look at their roles in this circle?
Well, Hakim Ajmal Khan and Dr. Ansari are well known figures
Yes.
within the nationalist pantheon, and people have written about them. They were, in a sense, mentors to Asaf Ali.
Yes.
They, they were his elders, they were his guides, and he looked up to them. Now, we know that Dr. Ansari was certainly someone uh, on whom Asaf Ali depended a great deal, and he played an important role in Asaf Ali and his marriage and the rest of his politics and so on. But they were older; they were much older than him, and they were in the position of mentors and guides. They are not part of this circle per se.
Yes.
Didn't have the same kind of strong, intimate relationship
Yes.
of equality as he had with the others, Asaf Ali and him. So they were certainly there, but they are there in a at a slight distance. Sayyid
Yes.
Hussein and Sayyid Mahmud are friends. Sayyid Hussein, uh, Asaf Ali and Sayyid Hussein met in London when both arrived there in 1908 to study law. So they were young men fascinated by living in the imperial metropolis and less interested in studying law than in having a good time.
Yes.
And then they met Sarojini Naidu, and by the time they come back to India in 1914, Asaf Ali is determined to become a lawyer and join. I mean, there's a nationalist stirring in him, while Sayyid Hussein wants to become a journalist and becomes a journalist and joins the Bombay Chronicle in Bombay. He's then and he's a good writer and acquires a certain profile and reputation, and he's then asked by Motilal Nehru to move to Allahabad and start Nehru English language newspaper for the Congress and for Motilal Nehru. And there his life suddenly takes a different turn because he meets Swarup Nehru, later Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. They fall in love, they elope, and it becomes a major scandal.
Yes.
Uh, and Motilal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi, you know, they are of one mind that this can't be allowed to proceed.
Right.
Uh, so Swarup Nehru is packed off to Gandhiji's ashram, while Sayyid Hussein is sent off to the US, where he lives for the next 30 years. So he more or less drops out of the story. So he's very much
Yes.
there in the
Yes.
first quarter of the book
Yes.
as Asaf Ali's very good friend, his closest friend, and also as a very close friend, and perhaps more than close friend of Sarojini Naidu.
Yes.
But then he disappears from the next two-thirds of the book because he's away in London, and
Yes.
we come across him occasionally. But he's removed from the glass, from the real
Yes.
action, and he comes back towards the end because he returns to India in 1946,
Yes.
and then in some ways that circle reforms.
Yes.
Sayyid Mahmud is again he enters the story in 1916. He's a young man making his way up the Congress ranks, uh, very, very conservatively Islamic in his orientation. He comes of the lot, he's the most religious in terms of personal inclination. None of the
Yes.
others are, but
Yes.
he is. And then, somewhat to his own surprise, and certainly to everyone's surprise who reads about him, he falls violently in love with Sarojini Naidu.
Yes.
And then it's a case of infatuation. And then she sees him through this. She's an older woman, so she understands this. She wants to retain the friendship, so she steers him through this infatuation till he gets over it, and they remain friends. And he's a prominent congressman in Bihar, and he has many differences. He's very, very loyal towards the Nehrus and to Jawaharlal Nehru
Yes.
in particular. As Hindu-Muslim relations deteriorate from the mid 1920s across the country, quite surprisingly, Sayyid Mahmud attaches himself even more closely to Jawaharlal Nehru, and
Nehru.
that attachment remains. But at the same time, he has profoundly different views on how to handle the Hindu Muslim relationship. And he keeps
Yes.
advising Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi on what to do and what not to do. And to some extent, this is the same advice which they are getting from other Muslim leaders.
Yes.
But it's very difficult for them to follow it. And this
True.
really leads to, the gulf, the communal gulf in India growing, and at the same time, the Muslim League becoming stronger.
Stronger. So, as you gave the example of Sayyid Mahmood in Congress, we had certain leaders who were quite pro-Hindu in their outlook. You talked about one was K.M. Munshi, the founder who ultimately founded Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan to promote, Indian culture and all. We had J.V. Kriplani. They were even called as the original Hindutvadis of Congress because Jan Sangh, the president of BJP, came into existence in 1952, and yet they were the voices of the Hindus, you can say, and atrocities committed on them. So, how do you see someone like Sayyid Mahmood and leaders like Riplani and K.M. Munshi in this wider context of the widening Hindu Muslim Gulf?
Well, they had many differences amongst them. And certainly K.M. Munshi and Sayyid Mahmood were, in correspondence with each other for a long time, and you can see the differences.
Yes.
They're very evident. Similarly, Kriplani and Sayyid Mahmood had many differences. But as I said, they were also basically like minded. Kriplani and Sayyid Mahmud were locked up together in Ahmednagar fort throughout the uh, Quit India movement. They saw
Yes.
the worth of each other, but yes, there were there were serious differences on how to handle the communal issue. And
Right.
as is well known, those differences could never be reconciled. The
Right.
basic point of difference, I think, between Sayyid Mahmud and Kriplani, or between Sayyid Mahmud and K.M. Munshi, was that Sayyid Mahmud felt that Hindus were a large majority and they should therefore deal with the Muslims from the position of being a majority. They
Yes.
should be uh, much more generous in extending terms. And Sayyid Kriplani and Munshi disagreed. In one letter, Munshi wrote that yes, Hindus and Muslims have to deal with each other, and we have to come to terms, and we have to negotiate to find the best agreement. But Muslims cannot expect to uh, become a cannot claim for themselves the status of a majority.
Yes.
They must understand that they are a
Right.
minority in the country, and that gulf somehow could never be bridged.
Very true. And if we again see these five people, again, many of them, like they studied law. Sarojini Naidu was a poet. So they had, options wherein they could choose more, you can say, lucrative career, a more stable career, could make good money and all. Yet they were definitely on the nationalist path, as you mentioned. Even Asaf Ali won the election for Congress. He became a prominent Congress person. What do you think would have, or do you think the friendship did play a role in this? They're moving towards this nationalist fervor or nationalist mood.
Well, it's true. It's easy to overlook the fact that those who joined the nationalist movement, because we are cynical about politicians today, we tend to overlook that at that time it was a considerable sacrifice,
Yes.
because
Yes.
in the case of Asif Ali, Sayyid Mahmood's, it's easy to see them as being very important lawyers with lucrative practices. They had, after all,
Yes.
law degrees from the West, which and therefore they would have stood out in any Indian courtroom. At that time, if you had a law degree from England, you were called a barrister, and you
Yes.
were automatically judged to be the senior most among, as compared to Indian lawyers. So they were. It's easy to see different career trajectories. Similarly, it's easy to see Sarojini Naidu as being a socialite, as being a writer, and someone who has a huge fan following. Uh, but not necessarily as a politician going to jail, taking part in agitations, giving up her literary pursuits because of politics. And similarly, you can imagine Arona Asaf Ali as being the wife of a successful Congress politician who becomes a minister, becomes a governor, becomes an ambassador, and in many ways becoming a kind of a template for young Indians, that this is a Hindu-Muslim marriage, which has, it's a kind of template for a new idea. But none of that happens because they all join the national movement and undergo periods of great stress and great difficulty. And as I said, there is a sense of sacrifice which is involved, and which is overlooked that because we have become cynical about politics
Yes.
today. So I do think that factor is important. The second point is, yes, I think there was an element of self of being motivated by others in the circle. I do think that where Sayyid Hussein and Asaf Ali are concerned, Sarojini Naidu's profile in public life and her interest in Indian nationalism actually inspired them and drew them into the nationalist movement.
Yes.
The rest of it they must have done on their own, but I think a part of that inspiration came from meeting her, knowing her, and seeing the attractions of a life in the public gaze from their association with her. Similarly, Sayyid Mahmud, I do think that his friendship first with Sarojini Naidu and then with Jawaharlal Nehru kept him in the nationalist movement. Otherwise, it's possible that he may have, been a nationalist for some time and then just gone back to law. Uh, so I do think that they knew each other, that they were constantly being motivated by each other, did play a role in their way their life trajectories worked out.
Right. And how you see, like in 1947, we got freedom. Sarojini Naidu died in 49. Asaf Ali died in 51 or 52. He went on to become an ambassador. So did Sayyid Mahmud. How do you see this? How do you see the conclusion? Like how it ended on this circle?
Well, the conclusion, I mean, their lives end somewhat unsatisfactorily, each of their lives. And I think that is principally because it was inevitable, because the nationalist movement in India was, of course, a great success, but it was also a great failure.
Yes.
So you see the ending of their lives on that note of half success and half failure. And I think that is, I didn't want it to end like that, but there was no choice. I think this particular group of friends, certainly they would have ended. Sayyid Mahmud lived on for a long time,
Yes.
and so did Arona Asaf Ali. But my story ends on on this mood of uh, half success and half failure, because that really was the story of the first half of the nationalists of the 20th century. You can't say it's an unqualified success, and at the
Right.
same time, it was not an unqualified failure.
Right. How do you see the partition of India? Because we are talking about nationalist Muslims who did not want to, merge with Pakistan, who did not really like the idea of Pakistan. In fact, it is said that, as Jinnah had cancer, and there was a doctor in Mumbai, Bombay that time who knew this, and yet he did not disclose that. And there are some people who go on claiming that had it been known, things would have been different. How you see, despite the presence of, nationalist Muslims, partition did happen. Was it solely the sinister design of Britishers, or was it Jinnah's rigidity towards, Pakistan? What led to partition, as for you? Or was it, say, the Congress failure in understanding, how important League, the Muslim League, would become? So there are many historians who attribute different reasons. What, as per you, was the most prominent one? Which
It was a combination of various factors. It was not one single factor. To so the British role was certainly there. I personally think that in the end, I mean, between 1945 and 1947, while there was nothing inevitable about partition, the way the British handled it gave it a certain push in that direction.
Yes,
Most importantly, Mountbatten, because you have to see in the end partition as not a, you know, it was possible in 1942 uh, when the Congress leaders are locked up in jail and they are discussing, and one point which C. Rajgopalachari had made earlier, and something which Asaf Ali keeps repeating when he's talking to Patel and Nehru, and they don't agree. It's possible. It was what C. Rajgopalachari was saying, that if you can't come to an agreement, you should at least negotiate on how you will part ways.
yes,
In 1942, 1943, there were different models of partition which were available. After all, in 1935, Burma, which had been a part of India, was separated and made into a different country. But none of
right.
what happened in South Asia in 1947 happened between India and Burma at that time.
In Burma. Correct.
Similarly, Sindh, which was a part of Bombay Presidency, was made into a separate province in 1931 or 1932. And again, it was a administratively well planned exercise with none of the chaos which attended 1947. In
Yes.
1947, what made partition different was the administrative breakdown and the total anarchy and chaos which descended over North India. So basically, this is where the role of the British plays an important. It becomes very important. And while there was the Congress factor, and maybe the Congress was should have been more rigid and should have negotiated with Jinnah better. Maybe Jinnah should have been more accommodating, as some of his own Muslim League leaders were telling him that let's try to reach an agreement, otherwise things will go too far. But the British in 1945, 46, 47, I think their role, had a certain exaggerated importance. And
Right.
they themselves had changed because the war had changed them. And the war had changed them most of all in the fact that they now just wanted to get out.
Get out.
It was like
Yes.
the Americans leaving Afghanistan, that they
Absolutely.
had had enough. They didn't
Yes.
really care about what was going to happen. So, so you have Mountbatten as viceroy, who suddenly advances the date of British leaving South
Leaving
Asia by
India.
one
Yes.
year.
Yes.
And in
True.
that year, you have to uh, you have to divide the country, you have to divide the army, you have to divide the police, you have to divide the administration, you have to carry out some kind of a process about what to do with the princely states, and the British were in a hurry to leave. So I think
Yes.
that was a situation of administrative chaos, and in that chaos, religious bigotry and frenzy took over. I think
Absolutely.
that part of it, the British are certainly to be held responsible. But for the League differences, for the Hindu Muslim differences, yes, there were serious differences. And perhaps in the kind of federal structure we now have, which we adopted
Yeah.
with the constitution, it was not possible to accommodate those differences. It's possible
True.
because the Hindu Muslim, the communal problem in India is not just a religious problem. It's partly a religious problem in the sense that you have minorities and majorities, but it's also a federal problem
Yes.
that you have minorities which are massive majorities in some provinces.
Yes.
So how to
That's
address
true.
the federal problem and the religious problem together? Perhaps you can't do it within the constitutional framework you have. So some kind of separation was inevitable even by the 1930s.
True. That's true. So two last questions. So one is again I'm moving back to history as we started, about history. So we are seeing a kind of dichotomy in history writing. So now we have left wing historians and right wing historians. While some say it is a good thing because we are seeing newer voices emerge in history writing, but we are clearly seeing this today. A historian is being described by his inclination, whether he is a left wing or a right wing. How do you see this dichotomy as a present historian?
So history has always been very, very divisive and very political. So left wing and right wing historians is nothing new. Uh, I think the trend today is that there are so many people writing history without really due regard to the factual or the empirical basis. So I think the University of WhatsApp has poses has eroded the discipline of history because
Right.
mythology is being passed off as history and
Okay.
fanciful thinking is being passed off as history. It doesn't matter. As I said, it's a subjective art. Everyone will write history from his or her point of view, and it is up to the reader to agree or disagree with it. That's always been the case. That's not going to change. All historians have always been selective in selecting facts because that is the nature of the discipline. So that's not really important. What is the issue nowadays is that there is so much of pseudo scholarship,
Yes.
or or things being passed off as history when they are in fact not history, which is not borne out by facts, or for which is not borne out by reasonable explanations. So I think that is a negative trend. That you have right wing historians and left wing historians is not important. It's a good thing. The more views you have, the more interpretations you have, as long as they are grounded on empirical facts, and as long as the bias or the inclination of the historian is clear, it's not important that there are different interpretations.
That's some definite food for thought. And sir, one last question. I think it may be a little too early. You just came out with your new book, but you have plans to write more books. And if yes, do you have you finalized what you are going to write about?
I'm thinking about writing something on the Indian interest in Southeast Asia,
Oh, nice.
and in particular about a group of historians in the 1920s and 1930s who were studying the Indian cultural impact on Southeast Asia. And I'm trying to relate that interest in Southeast Asia to more contemporary issues and to do with how we look at the world today. But it's still something which I'm thinking about. It'll take some time.
Okay. So is it going to be a kind of sequel to History Men, or is it on similar lines, wherein you talked about three
Well,
historians?
it's a sequel in the sense that this is also about historians,
Yes.
but
Yes.
it's also about how. I mean, what interested me in this was that this was the first time, the first and only time, that you had a group of historians in India who were seriously looking at non Indian history.
Right.
They didn't think it was non Indian history, they thought this was the history of Greater India. And, and
Right.
the group they had formed themselves into a group which called itself the Society for the Study of Greater India. They
Yes.
didn't think they were studying non-Indian history, but in fact, it is non-Indian history because they were looking at what we today call the Indo-Pacific in
Right.
some ways. But I'm also trying to relate it to what happened after 1947 and closer to our own times. So it's not really similar to that book.
Great. So I will definitely be waiting for that book. And all those who are watching, well, again, this is one book, Circus of Freedom. I strongly recommend, as mentioned at the very beginning of this session, it's a very different take on history, something which will not find in other history books. So for all, if you are a history buff like me, this is one book you should not miss. Ambassador Raghavan, it was a pleasure talking to you. It was a wonderful session, and I wish you all the best for your future books.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Abhishek, and thank you for inviting me to your program.
Thanks.